On May the 5th, 2021, I went to help a couple of friends move a couch. It was extra heavy, and I got on one end and lifted. I immediately lost my strength and had to step back and drop my end. I felt faint and I knew something was horribly wrong, and the last thing I remember in this worldly reality was that I apologized to my friends and told them to call my wife and tell her I love her, and to call 911 because I thought I was going to die. From there I began to black out, and from my perspective, things changed drastically from the experience people were having around me. I came to in the hospital in Bozeman, Montana. I was walking around the IC ward and found a place to sit next to a very sad person who was of indeterminate gender in their late teens or early 20s. We talked about where we were from. They were from Wyoming, and I sensed that they were coming to terms with a death. They asked where I was from, and I said I was from nearby, but originally far to the south. They said that I had a long journey ahead, far beyond the mountains, and they thanked me for being kind. I truly felt a very strong sense of compassionate love for the person. I felt so sorry for them. I knew I was waiting for something, but I wasn't sure what, and I was no longer certain why I was at the IC ward. And suddenly I was transported into a very dark place. I looked around me to get a sense of my surroundings as best as I could. There were darker shapes looming around me, and I sensed that they were aware of me. There were also silhouettes of large, inanimate objects, almost like standing stones or hoodoos, but in the near lightlessness it was difficult to discern. Where the fuck am I asked. Then the thought of the Valley of the Shadow of Death came to mind, and I knew right then that I was on the way to the other side. I also knew there must be a light, yet I did have a little fear of asking the way from the beings in the darkness, even though I think I may have somehow known some of them. But as soon as I knew I needed to find the light, I began to see faint distant stars, and at the end of it all, I could see a faint glow. I felt like I was traveling through space, and my direction and speed of travel was a matter of thought or will, so of course I willed myself towards the light. All fear left me, and I felt no sadness, and I felt a sense of overwhelming expansiveness, a sense of infinity that I had never experienced before. And the closer I got to the glow, which was now a true light, I felt more and more joy. All I could say was, wow. But then I knew that something was going to stop my progress. There were flashing lights, almost like police lights, in a large barrier, not unlike a concrete Jersey barrier in front of what had grown to be a looming wall of warm light. And my father, who had died 5 years earlier, was sitting on the barrier. Needless to say, I was overwhelmed with the joy of seeing my dad, and he was restored to youth and strength, and he was laughing, but he held up his hand and shook his head. I knew I had to return, yet I was happy about that too. What passed between us was not verbal. It was like a mental link, filled with ineffable knowledge, telepathic, and my sense of infinity was further confirmed when he showed me a galaxy in the palm of his hand. It looked very much like the Andromeda Galaxy, a beautiful spiral that blazed from his upheld hand, which he then gently cradled and allowed me to see up close. The love and warmth that emanated from this impossibly gargantuan being that had been my father on Earth was nearly overwhelming, and then I began to move backwards through space. Back on Earth, in my body and speech, which was compromised by the effects of a burst brain aneurysm and subarachnoid hemorrhage, I awoke to nurses and doctors. My surgeon asked my name, and all I could say was Rodder, which has since become their nickname for me. I thought I was still in Bozeman, but they informed me that I had been life-flighted from there to University Hospital in Salt Lake City. I kept the NDE to myself, because as vividly clear as it was, I still had some doubts, until I landed in the ICU in Bozeman a month later with hydrocephalus, and learned that I had been unconscious on a gurney during my entire previous visit, when the aneurysm first occurred. The thing is, I remembered everything about the ICU, including the seats in which I sat where I encountered the young, sad person. I still get chills thinking about that. I fully believe that kid was someone who had passed, and I hope they have found their way since. Now I do have a much stronger sense of consciousness after our time on this planet. It is much larger than any scriptural view from any tradition, although I can see small parallels and truths in those writings, but I can't really call the next place heaven in the Judeo-Christian sense. I take comfort in the fact that it is much larger, much more welcoming, and more universal than most religions teach. Maybe that message is part of the reason I got sent back. I imagine I could write a whole book on this, but for now, this lonely little Reddit post will have to suffice.